All right, guys, David with the Herald Group here. We are continuing the journey into the Acable.com real estate education course. First segment, Introduction to Modern Real Estate Practice. We're on to Chapter 7, The Business of Value, and let's get started.
Chapter 7, Real Estate, the Business of Value.
All right, guys, recap on Chapter 7, The Business of Value. This was a great section, lots of good information. We start off with how do we value a property? What is a valuation and what does it mean? I think we've all heard of an appraisal. It's an impartial, qualified opinion on the value of a specific property. And this is what lenders typically lean on when it comes time to finally loan on a property, because they don't want to loan on a property that if they get stuck with it isn't worth what somebody's paying. Because when somebody's buying a home, they're emotional, they might be willing to pay more than it's actually worth because it's in the right school district or it's near a friend or a family member. There's a couple of ways where you can value property. The three that they talked about is you can have a sales comparison approach. This is pretty standard in a residential type of appraisal. Usually lenders are going to want at least 3 comps. That comp is short for comparable. And a comparable is similar properties that have sold in the area recently. So if you're in a neighborhood and your buyer is selling, or your buyer is looking at purchasing a single family 2,500 square foot home, you're going to start looking for, in the last 90 days, what have single story, similar sized homes sold for. Put those together, that's going to give you an idea of what it's going to cost for them to purchase a property in that area. Another method, and this one was new to me, is the cost to replace method. And just like it sounds, how much would the property cost to replace in today's construction costs? So let's say today it's $200 a square foot to replace the house. We'll put a value to the dirt, a value to the structure. There's your sales price. I've been doing real estate a long time. I've never heard anybody use the cost to replace method from a purchase or sales standpoint. Normally I'll hear cost to replace when I'm talking to my insurance provider and they're trying to come up with a valuation for the property. They don't really care how much I paid for it. They want to know, in a catastrophic event, what would it cost to replace the property? And more in commercial properties, you have the income-based approach. Income-based approach is where you identify the maximum gross rents that you can come up with, or GPR, gross potential rents. And once you've identified the gross potential rent, now you start looking at your liabilities. Your liabilities can be current or expected vacancies. Is there a tenant that is or isn't paying their rent on time? What does it cost to manage the property? What are your taxes? What does it cost to maintain the outside of the building or the common areas? You take the gross potential rents, subtract out your liabilities, and now you've got your NOI, or net operating income. And when I was buying commercial properties, NOI is the most important thing you can look at. Now you can take that NOI and you can establish what's called a capitalization rate, or a cap rate. So the cap rate is used to define how much return you can get on your money. So you take the out-of-pocket expense and the cap rate, divide that, and that's going to give you a percentage of return. Now you're going to have to look at the deal separately from what the sales cap rate is going to be, because usually the sales cap rate does not include mortgage payments. So let's say we're looking at a property, we get the NOI, we figure out the cap rate, and it's coming in at a 7 cap. Well, a few years ago, a 7 cap was great. Money was 3%. So you look at your cost of your loan versus your out-of-pocket expense, there's your cash flow. In our current market in 2023, we're looking at 7.5%, 8%, sometimes 9% cost of money. So a 7 cap would be a break even once you start paying the bank, or even be underwater. So you got to be careful. Another thing they talked about as a way of valuing property, and I did this a lot, was a broker's price opinion. So a broker's price opinion is just that. It's the opinion of the broker you're dealing with, what they think the value of the property is. And then what I did with broker opinions when I was doing this type of real estate is If I wanted to buy a building from somebody that wasn't for sale, I cold call somebody, I get to know them, I say, I'd like to buy your property. I go, okay, what are you going to give me? And I mean, I'll throw out a super low number, but you don't want to offend them. So you say, here's the deal. I will pay for a broker's price opinion on the property, and let's see if you like that number. And to do that, you call up a broker, and you, depending on your relationship with that broker, offer them a couple $100. Depending on the size, complexity of the property, it could be a few $1,000s, and they will put together a broker's price opinion. Now, they are supposed to be impartial. They're a broker, they're held to certain standards, they shouldn't lean one way or the other. So you can't call your buddy and say, hey man, I want to get this property really cheap, let's get a terrible broker opinion, because that'd be against their code of conduct. Another interesting thing they talked about was the type of markets. So are we in a buyer or a seller's market? So how do we determine if we're in a buyer or a seller's market? Acable has a math equation that they come up with, a ratio and kind of a timing of how do you define if it's a buyer or seller's market. To me, a buyer or seller's market is kind of your gut feeling. Are there more homes than buyers? Well, you're in a buyer's market. Is there low inventory and you're having a really hard time finding something for your client? Well, you're in a seller's market. They came up with this ratio here. Let's say you've got 6,000 homes for sale, and the homes sell approximately 2,000 per month. Divide those two numbers, you get 3. You got 3 months of inventory in the market. And they define a buyer's market, or I'm sorry, a seller's market as 0 to 4 ratio, a neutral market, a 4 to 6 ratio, and a buyer's market, a 6 ratio. And that's the number of months that a house will, on average, sit on the market. So if a house is sitting on the market for 6 months, your buyer's probably going to be in a pretty good spot to get a reduced price. Lots of good information in Chapter 7. I'm excited to look at Chapter 8, and let's continue the journey.